Good morning.
Good morning.
Terry Pagani, our Capital District Director of Lay Servant Ministries, was here last week to bring the message. And she started out by saying that she had some difficulty figuring out a topic for her sermon. Well, I'm here to say that I struggled with that as well. And I had a lot of ideas. I read a lot of things, but nothing was really grabbing me. So then I thought, all right, I'm going to not do this for a while. And I just started reading some book reviews and some interviews with authors online. Because as a lay servant, and we have a lot of us here in the church, one of the questions they ask us every year is, what books have you read this year to help increase your faith, grow your faith? So I like to read book reviews because if something isn't well reviewed, I might not be interested. So I was reading book reviews and some interviews with some authors. And what was interesting to me was that the first couple I read had a common theme to them, and I thought, perhaps this is what I should talk about. So I will. The first book review that I read was really an interview with the authors, and it was a book called The Tiny Truths Illustrated Bible. And it was a picture book for children, a picture Bible for children. The authors, Joanna Rivard and Tim Penner, were interviewed, and they were asked how did they come up with this idea for this particular type of Bible. And they said that they had a simple idea of introducing children to the Bible as one big, gigantic story. It has 3 parts to it. It tells us who God is, it tells us who we are, and it tells us what we were made for. Now, children's Bibles generally, if you've seen a lot of them, generally focus on one part of the story at a time. We teach about creation. We teach about Moses parting the sea. We teach about Jonah and the whale. How many know all of those stories so far? Good, okay. We teach about Daniel and the lion's den. We teach about David and Goliath. We teach about and even make musicals about Joseph and his colored coat. We talk about Jesus' birth, death, resurrection. Even last week, when we were doing Vacation Bible School, a week and a half ago now, we learned about Jesus feeding 5,000 people. We learned about, did you know, by the way, that the 5,000 people were just the men that were there? The women and the children weren't counted. So everybody says Jesus fed 5,000. He fed way more than 5,000. That was just the men that were counted. We taught about Jesus calming the storm when he was in the boat. We had a story about Jesus being tempted by the devil, about Jesus being a good shepherd, and lastly about Paul and Silas in prison. But these were all individual stories. Now they had a common theme, and you can look up on the wall over there. We have true peace, true riches, true power, true love, true hope. So we had a theme through Vacation Bible School, and often, almost every Vacation Bible School has a theme that ties the week together. Ours were that our theme was that God gives us riches, power, hope, love, and peace. The true one of each of those things. That didn't tie in the Old Testament. It didn't give us an overarching view of the entire Bible. So the goal of this particular Bible that I was reading the interview of the authors with, according to the authors, is to help young children understand that the stories, the individual stories in the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament, can all be tied together as tiny truths that teach one grand lesson, God's love for us. The interesting part about their interview was that they said the story is still unfolding, and we're a part of it. And the end result of this story is that God is going to restore the earth, and we, in each of our own little spheres, can help bring that about by acting like Jesus and emulating what Jesus did. We are defined by our love, given to us by God, that we were made for love, and God has given us meaning. The interesting thing that I found about this woman was she had her master's or maybe even her doctorate degree in French existentialism. How many of you had to read Albert Camus in school? in high school. I did. We read Metamorphosis, and then there were a couple of others that we read. And, when I was in high school, I thought, this is really cool. I could care about nothing. I like this. I don't have to be responsible to anybody. And I went to Sunday school. I went to church. I was involved in the choir when I was growing up. I have been a member of the Methodist Church for as long as I can remember. But let me tell you, when I was in 11th grade, and I was reading Albert Camus, and the thought of having to answer to no one for anything was awesome. I thought, this is the best thing ever. I love Albert Camus. I am going to be an existentialist. That did not last all that long, but mostly because his books were hard to get through. But I thought it was a pretty cool concept. The woman who wrote this Bible, her master's and her doctorate degree are in French existentialism. And she said existentialism is defined by, you make your own definition. Nothing is given to you in terms of there are no expectations. Whereas the Bible gives you all of the expectations, and it tells you who you are and why you're here. And that's pretty cool. So then, I read an article, another interview with a guy whose book was called The Whole Story of the Bible in 16 Verses. Wow. Okay. We had 2 years ago, in the summer, a small group of us read through the entire Bible in 90 days. And we started in June. We ended at the end of August. Some of our group actually did get through the whole Bible. It was a challenge to do it. Did you know that if you read just 12 pages a day of the Bible, you will read the entire Bible in 90 days? That's all it takes, 12 pages a day. Now, a lot of our Bibles, when you open them up, the print is small. There's almost always 2 columns, so each column has really got enough words on it for a full page in any other book. So it's really like reading 24 pages, and it takes a commitment of about an hour a day. But if you read for an hour a day, you can get through the entire Bible. And we did it. We started in Genesis, we ended with Revelations, and we did it. We had to push through some of the Old Testament stuff. Those of you in the group with me, Judges, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Wow. Okay, they were hard to read, and 12 pages seemed endless of that. But we read the whole thing, start to finish, and it was pretty cool. So when I read the title of the book, The Whole Story of the Bible in 16 Verses, I thought, goodness gracious, we read a lot of extra stuff if we could have gotten through the Bible in 16 verses. So the author of this particular book, his name is Dr. Chris Bruno, and he selected these particular scriptures, which he says will help readers understand the overarching story of the Bible, and these are verses that serve as the turning points in the Bible. So I've asked Sarah and Julia to help me this morning. We're going to hear all of those 16 verses. So I have not read the book yet. I plan to read the book, but we're going to do the Cliff Notes version here by giving you the 16 verses. So I wanted to, before we start with that, I wanted to say that the focus of this particular book, and I like learning things. I know I've told you that before. What I learned when I was reading this is the difference between systematic theology and biblical theology. Does anybody know what the difference is? Okay, I didn't. So, systematic theology looks to explain a subject from the point of view of the entire Bible. So, what does the entire Bible say about sin, for example? That is systematic theology. Whereas biblical theology is the study of the doctrines of the Bible arranged according to their chronology and historical background. So, in contrast to systematic theology, which categorizes doctrine according to topic, biblical theology shows the unfolding of God's revelation as it progresses through history. So it really is telling you that the entire Bible is one long story. And I thought that was really interesting. So I'm going to ask Sarah and Julia to come up here. And we are going to start. And we're going to read these verses. Now, I have them alternating. So we're going to start with the first bunch of verses, or first verse. It's from Genesis 1:31, and it's about creation.
God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
Okay, so that tells us that God has the authority to create things. He did, and he created things. Our second verse is about human beings, and it's actually two verses. It's from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27.
Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them.
Good story so far. We've got God created everything, and then he created man in his image, men and women, in his image. But then, dun 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 dun, we have a fall. So we're going to talk about the fall in Genesis 3, verses 6 through 7.
When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves.
Everything was good, and then everything wasn't. But God promised redemption. Genesis 3, verse 15.
And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel.
Okay, so the snake got us into trouble, but we're going to crush it. Then God brings about Abraham. There's a promise here for us about Abraham and the seed of Abraham in Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3.
I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you.
So we have creation of men and women, the fall, redemption promised, and then here's Abraham, the father. We sing a song in Sunday school, Father Abraham had many sons, right? Many sons had Father Abraham. He also had a lot of grandchildren. Judah the king was one of them, great-grandchild, and we have a verse about Judah in Genesis 49:10. Notice we're still in Genesis 49:10.
The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his.
Moving right along, we're going to come up to the Passover lamb in Exodus, chapter 12, verse 23.
When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe, and will pass over that doorway. And he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down.
We have an entire book of Psalms written by King David. We're going to read about him in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 and 13.
When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne for his kingdom forever.
Sounds like a promise. He is the one who will build a house for my name. We're going to move to Isaiah 53:6, where we hear about the suffering servant.
We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
But even after that, resurrection is promised in, of all books, Ezekiel, chapter 37, verses 3 through 5.
He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life.
And also in Isaiah, God promised new heavens and a new earth. Chapter 65, verse 17.
See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind.
So we had 11 verses from the Old Testament that are all talking about things that are to come. We had creation, we had a fall, we had a promise, and then we had prophecy about things to come. Prophecy is fulfilled in the New Testament, starting with Mark chapter 1, verses 14 through 15.
After John was put in prison, Jesus went to Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God. The time has come, he said. The kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news.
The kingdom of God is near. Then in John 19:30, we hear about the cross.
When he had received the drink, Jesus said, It is finished. With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
But once again, not the end of the story. Normally when people die, that's the end. Not in this case. We have the resurrection. Romans 1, verses 3 and 4.
Regarding his son, who as to his earthly life was a descendant of David, and who through the Spirit of holiness was appointed the Son of God in power, by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord.
We have fulfillment. We have the cross. We have resurrection. And then we have justification. Romans chapter 3, verses 21 through 26.
But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all who have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus.
For those keeping track, that was 15. So now number 16. Once again, a new heaven and a new earth. We're going to talk about glory in Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 through 4.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.
So there you have it. the whole story of the Bible, start to finish, in 16 separate sections of verse. I want to thank Sarah and Julia for reading for me. They saw this morning for the first time, so I think they did an awesome job. So we heard some of those verses from the Old Testament. We heard that in light of the fact that creation is good, it went sideways with the serpent. But then there was a covenant with Abraham. God gave promises to David. They were fulfilled through Jesus. And we have another example there, the seed of Abraham. We were talking about Father Abraham. That could be traced back to the seed of man through Eve and the seed of the serpent, and forward through the seed of Judah, who was Abraham's great-grandson, then passed on right down through David and David's son, and that is the line that led to Jesus. So all of the promises that are made in Genesis and on are fulfilled in the New Testament. And it is a long story, but it is a good one. A few years ago here, we used the story as our theme for the year, both in Sunday school and in church. Those of you might remember Pastor Kim preached on the story every Sunday, and we worked our way through the stories of the Bible that way, from the beginning to the end. In college, I wasn't an existentialist again at that point, but I did stop going to church for a few years. It was quite easy to not go while I was in college. I said, I'm a Methodist, and they had a non-denominational chapel there, and that wasn't good enough for me because I wanted a Methodist church, so I used that as my excuse to not go to church. And I had a small crisis of faith a couple months after I got married, when I had a very small wedding party. I had a maid of honor and 2 bridesmaids, and one of my bridesmaids passed away from cancer that she found out she had when she was actually trying on the dress for my wedding. And she was a tiny girl anyway, and this dress was just hanging on her. I mean, she was getting thinner and thinner, and her mother was helping her and said, what is wrong? And they went to the doctor and found out she had cancer. And she passed away in February. I got married in October, and within 5 months she was dead. And she had been married only a year. And I watched the face of her husband at the graveside, and I thought, God, I don't know what you're doing, but this just doesn't cut it for me. And that stopped. Again, I had a small crisis of faith, because I didn't really understand that. And I didn't go to church for a while, a year or so, but something was missing when I didn't go to church, and I felt it. I felt that something was missing in my life. How many of you have read The Life of Pi? Did anybody see the movie, The Life of Pi? Okay, books are always better than movies. I read the book. I haven't seen the movie, so I can't say definitively on this particular one, but in general, I find books to be better. I read The Life of Pi a few years ago, and the book was outstanding, and I highly recommend it. I'm not going to give away the storyline, but there was a line near the end of the story. The young man was asked which version of the story he told was correct or true. And his answer was basically, isn't the story with God in it better? I think that it is. I highly recommend reading that. Try reading the Bible. Try remembering that it is one long story, and that it is not yet finished, but we are a part of it.